The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled under a dozen crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across marble columns and polished floors. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala drew the city's most prominent families. Business leaders in tailored tuxedos, socialites in designer gowns, all gathered to support a worthy cause while seeing and being seen. Elena Montgomery sat quietly near the entrance in her wheelchair, watching the elegant crowd with observant eyes. At 35, she carried herself with a grace that had nothing to do with her ability to walk. Her navy evening gown was understated but elegant, her auburn hair swept into a simple chignon. She wore her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only jewelry she'd kept from her previous life. 5 years ago, Elena had been Dr. Elena Montgomery, heiress to the Montgomery Medical Foundation fortune, engaged to a prominent surgeon, living in a world of privilege and expectation. Then came the accident. A drunk driver, a month in the hospital, and the devastating news that she would never walk again. Along with her mobility, she'd lost her fiancé, most of her social circle, and her illusions about the people she'd thought were friends. Her father had been supportive, loving. But his sudden death 2 years later had revealed a truth that shattered Elena's world completely. The family fortune was gone, lost to bad investments and her father's secret gambling addiction. The foundation, the estate, the trust funds, all of it had been sold quietly to pay debts. Elena had been left with almost nothing except her dignity and her determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. Now she worked as a volunteer coordinator for various charities. A job that paid modestly but gave her purpose. Tonight, she was here not as the Montgomery heiress people remembered, but as a working woman who had earned her invitation through months of organizing fundraising events. Elena had chosen a table toward the back of the ballroom, partly for easier wheelchair access, but mostly to observe rather than participate in the social theater. She watched as couples glided across the dance floor, as groups clustered around the open bar, as children in their finest clothes ran between tables while their parents socialized. That's when she noticed him. A man in his 40s moving quietly around the edges of the ballroom. He wore work clothes, a navy shirt and khaki pants, and carried cleaning supplies. This was clearly a hotel employee, but something about his presence was different. He moved with quiet dignity, acknowledging guests politely when they noticed him, but mostly working invisibly to ensure everything remained perfect for the evening. Behind him trotted a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with bright red hair and an elaborate pink dress that looked like it had been carefully chosen for this special evening. She stayed close to her father, wide-eyed at the grandeur around her, but clearly comfortable in his presence. Elena smiled as she watched the pair. The contrast between the working man and the elegant ballroom highlighted something beautiful. The way love transcends circumstances. The little girl obviously adored her father, and he treated her like the most precious guest at the gala. As the evening progressed, Elena noticed the cruel whispers starting among some of the guests. A group of men in expensive tuxedos had noticed her, and their comments carried just far enough for her to hear. "Look at Elena Montgomery," one said with a sneer. "Hard to believe she used to be the queen of this crowd." "I heard she's practically destitute now," another added. "Living in some tiny apartment working for charity wages. Such a fall from grace. Well, what did she expect?" A third man chimed in. "Nobody wants damaged goods. Her fiancé was smart to get out when he did." Elena felt the familiar sting of their words, but she'd learned to armor herself against such cruelty. She'd discovered that some people found comfort in others' misfortunes, as if witnessing someone else's struggles somehow elevated their own position. The little girl with red hair had been exploring the ballroom while her father worked nearby. She seemed fascinated by the chandeliers, the flowers, the beautiful gowns. As she wandered, she found herself near Elena's table. "Your dress is so pretty," the child said, with the directness that only children possess. "It's like the ocean," Elena smiled warmly. "Thank you, sweetheart. Your dress is beautiful, too. You look like a princess." The little girl giggled. "That's what Daddy said. He said tonight I get to be a princess at the ball." She paused, studying Elena with curious eyes. Are you a princess too? Oh, I don't think so, Elena replied gently. I'm just Elena. But you look like a queen, the child insisted. Queens are elegant and kind. Daddy taught me that. He said real queens don't need crowns. They just need to treat people with respect and dignity. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Your daddy sounds like a very wise man. He is. He's the best daddy in the whole world. He works really hard so we can have a nice life together. The little girl glanced around the ballroom. He's working here tonight so I could see how fancy people live. But I think he's more elegant than anyone here. At that moment, the child's father approached. Sophie, I hope you're not bothering this lady. I'm Michael Chen, he said to Elena, his voice carrying a slight embarrassment. My daughter has a tendency to start conversations with everyone she meets. She's delightful, Elena assured him. I'm Elena Montgomery. Sophie was just telling me about her wonderful father. Michael's expression changed slightly when he heard her name. Elena braced herself, waiting for the recognition, the awkwardness, perhaps the pity that often followed when people realized who she used to be. Instead, Michael's face lit up with genuine warmth. Ms. Montgomery, you organized the toy drive at Children's Hospital last Christmas, didn't you? My Sophie spent 2 weeks in the pediatric ward last year after her appendix surgery. Your toy drive, it made such a difference. The children were so excited to have something special during such a frightening time. Elena felt a flush of pleasure. You remember that? How could I forget? You came by every day to read stories to the kids. Sophie still talks about the lady who brought books and stuffed animals and made everyone feel less scared. Sophie tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, I told you she was a queen. Look how she makes people happy. Michael smiled at his daughter, then looked back at Elena with respect in his eyes. Sophie's right. Real royalty isn't about money or titles. It's about how you treat people, especially when they're vulnerable. Their conversation was interrupted by loud laughter from the group of men who had been gossiping earlier. One of them had clearly had too much to drink and was speaking louder than he realized. Can you believe Elena Montgomery is actually here? He said with cruel amusement. Sitting there in her wheelchair like she belongs with decent society. Someone should tell her this gala is for people who matter. The entire section of the ballroom fell silent. Elena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Little Sophie Chen stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding attention in the vast ballroom. Her voice, clear and confident, rang out across the marble floors. Excuse me, Sophie said, looking directly at the group of men. You're being very rude about the Queen. The Queen? One of the men asked, clearly amused by the child's interruption. Yes, Sophie said firmly. Queen Elena, she's the nicest, most elegant person here. She reads stories to sick children and organizes toy drives and makes people feel better when they're scared. What do you do? The ballroom was completely quiet now. Everyone had stopped talking, stopped dancing, stopped moving to watch this small girl stand up to a group of wealthy, powerful men. Michael stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. But Sophie wasn't finished. My daddy taught me that real kings and queens are the people who help others, she continued. Queen Elena helps children in the hospital. She organized events to raise money for people who are sick. She treats everyone with kindness. Sophie looked around the ballroom. That makes her more royal than anyone here. An older woman in an elaborate gown approached the group. Elena recognized her as Margaret Wellington, one of the city's most prominent philanthropists and social leaders. The child is absolutely right, Mrs. Wellington said, her voice carrying the authority that came with decades of social leadership. Elena Montgomery has done more for this community in the past 2 years than most of us have done in our entire lives. She looked directly at the group of men who had been making cruel comments. While some people are busy tearing others down, Elena has been building others up. I've watched her work. The hours she puts in, the care she shows, the way she treats every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Mrs. Wellington turned to address the entire ballroom. For those of you who don't know, Elena Montgomery organized tonight's silent auction. She secured most of the donations, coordinated the volunteers, and personally ensured that every detail would contribute to our fundraising success. She did this not for recognition or social status, but because she believes in helping children who are facing medical challenges. The crowd began to murmur. Processing this information, Elena felt overwhelmed by the unexpected support. But Sophie wasn't finished. The little girl walked over to Elena's wheelchair and, with the solemnity of a royal ceremony, took off her small tiara. A plastic princess crown that was clearly her most prized possession for the evening. "Queens should wear crowns," Sophie announced, gently placing the tiara on Elena's head. "There! Now everyone can see what I saw from the beginning." The ballroom erupted in applause. Not polite charity gala applause, but genuine, heartfelt recognition. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at this remarkable little girl who had seen past circumstances to character, who had defended her with the fearless honesty that only children possess. Michael Chen looked at his daughter with obvious pride, then at Elena with deep respect. "I apologize for what those men said." Sophie's right. "You are royal in every way that matters." As the evening continued, Elena found herself surrounded by people she hadn't expected. Guests who wanted to thank her for her work, to contribute to her causes, to treat her not as an object of pity, but as a person of value and accomplishment. The men who had been cruel earlier quietly left the gala, their behavior having earned them the disapproval of their peers. Elena realized that their cruelty said nothing about her worth and everything about their own character, but it was Sophie's simple act of recognition that stayed with Elena long after the evening ended. As the gala wound down, the little girl returned to Elena's table. "Did you have a good time, Queen Elena?" Sophie asked seriously. "The best time," Elena replied, touching the plastic tiara that still sat on her head. "Thank you for seeing me." "Really seeing me?" "That's what friends do," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "They see the good parts and ignore the silly parts. The silly part is your wheelchair. The good parts are, well, everything else." Michael approached to collect his daughter. "Sophie, we need to head home. It's past your bedtime." As they prepared to leave, Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Michael, if you ever need anything at all, please call me. Sophie gave me a gift tonight that I can never repay, but I'd like to try." Michael smiled. "Just keep being who you are, Ms. Montgomery. That's gift enough." After they left, Elena sat quietly in the emptying ballroom, still wearing Sophie's plastic tiara. Mrs. Wellington approached one final time. "You know, dear, that little girl was right about you being a queen. But more than that, she showed everyone here what real leadership looks like. She saw injustice and spoke up. She saw worth and proclaimed it. She saw someone being hurt and stepped in to help." Elena nodded thoughtfully. Children see things so clearly sometimes. "No pretense, no agenda, just truth." "The question is," Mrs. Wellington continued, "what will you do with the recognition? Tonight showed you that this community values your work, your character, your contributions. Don't let other people's limited vision define your sense of worth." As Elena finally left the gala that evening, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. The accident had taken her ability to walk, her inheritance had been lost, her old social circle had abandoned her. But somehow she'd found something more valuable. She'd found purpose, authentic relationships, and the knowledge that her worth wasn't determined by her circumstances, but by her choices. 6 months later, Elena Montgomery sat before the city council, presenting her proposal for an adaptive community center that would serve people with disabilities and their families. The center would offer resources, support groups, adaptive sports programs, and social events designed to build inclusive communities. In the front row of the council chambers sat Michael and Sophie Chen. Sophie was holding a sign she'd made herself. "Queen Elena makes dreams come true." The funding for Elena's community center was approved unanimously. As she left the chambers that day, Sophie ran up to her with excitement. "Queen Elena, is your dream castle going to be ready soon?" "Very soon, Princess Sophie," Elena replied, adjusting the small plastic tiara she now wore to every important meeting. A reminder of the night a 6-year-old girl taught a room full of adults what true royalty looked like. "And everyone will be welcome there?" "Everyone," Elena confirmed. "Because that's what real queens do. They make sure everyone has a place where they belong." Sophie nodded with satisfaction. "I knew you were a queen from the very beginning." Elena smiled, understanding now that Sophie had been right all along. Crowns weren't made of gold or jewels. They were made of character, compassion, and the courage to use whatever gifts you had in service of others. Sometimes the most important recognitions come not from those in power, but from those who see with pure hearts, like a little girl who understood that true royalty was measured not by what you had lost, but by what you chose to give. The end.